Marco Rubio, the US Secretary of State, gave what was arguably the most watched speech at the Munich Security Conference last week. He spoke so warmly about America's friends right here in Europe.
Because for us Americans, our home may be in the Western Hemisphere, but we will always be a child of Europe.
And he received a standing ovation at the very end. You could almost feel the relief in the room, the sense that the Transatlantic alliance might not be dead after all. Even the interviewer openly acknowledged it.
Mr. Secretary, I'm not sure you heard the sigh of relief through this hall when we were just listening to what I would interpret as a message of reassurance, of partnership.
But guys, seriously, do not be fooled. Just because Rubio name-checked Shakespeare, Dante, and the Cathedral of Cologne does not mean that the US-EU relationship is suddenly fixed. In fact, I'd argue the exact opposite. And that Rubio's speech was far more dangerous than JD Vance's speech last year. Because it lowered the temperature and really risks pushing Europe into a false sense of calm. I mean, just look at what happened next. 2 days after Munich, Rubio didn't go to Paris, Berlin, or Brussels. He went to Slovakia and then to Hungary. Two governments that regularly clash with the EU, and two leaders who block common positions, undermine sanctions, and maintain very cozy relationships with Moscow. Just have a look for yourself, as right here, Rubio stands next to Orban and says,
President Trump is deeply committed to your success because your success is our success. Because this relationship we have here in Central Europe through you is so essential and vital for our national interests in the years to come.
And that's not even all of it. He went so much further, suggesting that President Trump would even be willing to provide financial assistance if Viktor Orban were to need it. And that should sound kind of familiar, as it's eerily similar to the political lifeline Trump threw to Milei in Argentina last year. And guys, let's call this out for what it really is. This is election interference. The MAGA camp doesn't just like Orban, it actively promotes him as their European role model. And it doesn't stop with him. Trump's allies have openly praised and supported Marine Le Pen in France, the AfD in Germany, and far-right movements across Europe that seek to weaken, hollow out, or outright dismantle the EU from within. And it's not just friendly words or photo ops. There's also money involved. Let me take you back to December last year, when Sarah Rogers traveled to Europe to meet a network of conservative think tanks and political figures, including Nigel Farage from Reform UK. The topic was simple, but so controversial. Whether the United States could deploy a pot of money to help spread what it calls American values in Europe. And just to be very clear, this means MAGA values. And yeah, since then, things have kind of taken off. According to Politico, the US State Department has approached none other than the Heritage Foundation to help compile a list of European think tanks that align with MAGA and are potentially worth funding. Yes, that's Heritage Foundation, the very same organization behind Project 2025, where it laid out super detailed plans to reshape the entire US government from top to bottom. And now, working alongside the US State Department, the Heritage Foundation has a new target in its sight: Europe. And talks have already started. The US State Department met with the French think tank Western Arc, a relatively new group that positions itself as anti-woke, strongly nationalist, and closely aligned with the broader MAGA movement. They've also spoken to Britain's Free Speech Union, an advocacy group that presents itself as the defender of free expression in the UK. And this doesn't stop with France and the UK. Two of the Heritage Foundation's closest allies in Europe are already very well known. The first is the Matthias Corvinus Collegium, or MCC, a powerful Hungarian think tank backed by Viktor Orban's government. And the second is Ordo Luris, a Polish legal group closely linked to the Law and Justice Party, or PiS. The scary part is that all of these actors on the screen have very similar goals. The US national security strategy openly talks about cultivating resistance to Europe's current political trajectory from within European countries. And it wants to do so by supporting so-called patriotic European parties. You know, the Le Pens, the Viktor Orbáns, and the Alice Weidels in Germany. And then there's the Heritage Foundation, which goes even further. In its very own publications, it openly calls for the abolition of the European Union. It describes the EU as a force for socialism, mass migration, the suppression of free speech, and the destruction of national sovereignty. And it argues that the Transatlantic Alliance would be way better off if the EU were, and I'm quoting here, consigned to the dustbin of history. Very, very strong words indeed. And then there's our European think tanks, who are pushing the same idea in more polished language. And they call it the Great Reset. In other words, a plan to fundamentally restructure, or even dismantle, the European Union as we know it today. And they want to replace the EU with what they call a so-called European Community of Nations. And within this new community, they want to introduce a national competences shield, strip power from the European Court of Justice, and reduce the European Parliament and the Commission to very weak administrative and consultative bodies. Simpler put, the end of the EU as a political project and a return to loosely coordinated nation states. What's striking to me here is not just how radical these ideas are, but how closely aligned these different actors are in their ultimate objectives. And if American money begins flowing into these networks, the result will likely be greater political fragmentation, democratic instability, and institutional paralysis across the European Union. That is the exact opposite of what a strong, resilient Europe would look like. Here's what I think. The US does not want a strong Europe. The US wants a fragmented European Union of single separate member states that are all trying to get the best deal with the United States. That, according to the MAGA organization, is in their interest. Just look at the facts. Don't look at all of the speeches, just look at the actions. Whether it's Rubio going to meet Orban in Hungary, or whether it's the US funding all of these NGOs, or worst of all, whether it's the US threatening to invade Greenland. All of this speaks that the US does not want to be working with us, but would prefer a almost like vassal continent that supports whatever their interests are. And this needs to stop. Having this standing ovation at the Munich Security Conference because Rubio's speech wasn't as bad as Vance's speech last year, that is a terrible standard. Let's stop clapping at these empty speeches and start working on proper actions. The next European Council meeting is in March next month. And right here, we need to talk about defense integration, single market integration, and yes, Eurobonds. These would be concrete actions at making us independent and making us the strong partner that the US apparently wants. Because to be honest, it doesn't. But, let's just pretend they do. Anyway, thank you so much for watching. And if you want to support us further, please do sign up to Patreon. And thank you so much to our presidents. Kristin, Peter, Clement, Daniel, Dev, Eupedia, Giuseppe, HGVDJ, Kiki, Loxen, Maciej, Michael, Rashid, Shaukien, Jan, Stefan, Unite Europe, and Ave Europa. See you in the next video.